All right, we're back. We are COMP125 in the summer 2018 semester, and it's week 11, part 2 of our broadcast. Yesterday we talked about AJAX, and we used AJAX with jQuery a little bit, and I kept on saying jQuery, I don't use it too much, and we had some issues. And there's reason for it, because, you know, I use jQuery for the bare minimum stuff, and usually just for AJAX if I'm going to use it at all. Now, I've been avoiding jQuery with you guys with AJAX because I want you guys to do jQuery or AJAX on your own, and kind of understand more of the low-level ways of doing things. So going back to what we did yesterday, just wanted to review. I always want to try and start with that. So we had an issue, right? Remember we talked about this? We couldn't output stuff, and I know the issue. I know what the issue is. I kind of figured it out when I walked away yesterday, and I spent some time with a couple of the other students. I figured it out. And of course, it's very simple, but you have to kind of put it in your mind what's really, really happening. So first, let's look at the application. Okay, so I'm going to run this thing. I'm going to go back to here to home. And you can see that when I go to my contact page, here's my contact page, I got nothing, right? But what you also see is inside, if I go inspect, and if I look at my console, I can see that I got an error with appending a child to something that doesn't exist. And why wouldn't it exist? Whenever you have something like an error like this that says something like, hey, property of append child of null, null is a good indicator that there is no object that you're referencing on the screen that has the whatever you're looking for. And we know that it does exist here because we can see it. We can see that there is a table right here, and we know that there is a table and there's a T body and there's a T head and all that kind of stuff. But why can't we link? Can we connect to it? We're doing it at the wrong time. The order is wrong because what's happened is we're trying to access it asynchronously again. It's all that ugly word, asynchronous, which we've been dealing with this whole couple weeks now. And when it's asynchronous, you have to wait till something finishes loading in order for you to access it, okay? So going back to our code, this is our problem. Our problem is, so make some room here so I can show you where we're doing everything. So this idea that I have here under the address books, I'm going to move it around, okay? We're loading JSON here inside of our main, but loading JSON is happening whatever order it decides to load. It doesn't mean that it's going to load in this order the way I've listed it. It's going to load the way it wants based on my operating system, the speed. It's going to be random. You don't know if you're going to, it's not going to necessarily do this. If I want to do this in this order, I have to, kind of do one call from another call from another call, almost like nested calls, which is kind of what I'm going to do here. So first things first. First, let's get rid of this load JSON call from the main. Okay, that's the first thing. So I'm just going to get rid of it. Okay. And I want to create another function called display data. Okay, I want to display data with this kind of function here, this thing here, this event listener. I want to display data. Okay, so I'm going to make a new function, and I'm going to put it somewhere like near load JSON. I'm going to say a function called display data, and this is where I'm going to display the data onto the screen somewhere. Okay. So my display data function, I want to get rid of all this. I want to kind of cut this out. So I'm going to go to my XHR event listener, because I'm probably not going to need it now in a second. You're going to see why. I'm going to grab all this stuff here, and you can see now that there's nothing in main. I'm going to kind of drag it and drop it or paste it inside my display data area, right? Now, I don't need to use this load event. The load event is there if you want to load a particular, wait for something to load. That's what we're waiting on, right? But in this case, I'm going to just take it out. Okay, I'm going to show you why. You can do it this way, but I don't need to, and I'm just going to kind of go to here. Okay, so this is this little self-contained function right now. All it does is it creates, it kind of hooks into a T-body if it exists, right? Then what it does is it says, let's set a counter to 0. It loops through each of the contacts in the contact and the address book. And then what it does is it starts creating elements. I'm actually creating a DOM elements off kind of like in a virtual DOM. I'm creating them all here. And then finally what I'm doing is I'm adding them down here. And what I want, one thing that's missing is I want to do a counter plus plus at the bottom. So I want to kind of increment my counter. So it's going to go from 0 to 1 to 2 and so on. So it starts at 0. I'm looping through for each of the objects. I could have used a for loop here, but I'm not going to modify it too much. And then what I'm doing is I'm creating an object that I can reference later. So I'm putting it into my array. I don't really need to do this. I'm doing it because I'm kind of adding my objects into my array. So if I can modify the array later if I want to, or whatever I want to do. And it's local to I'm kind of saving everything in memory. And I'll show you another way to do this in a different way without using arrays today. All right, so then, yeah, we're good. We create our elements. Our TR is our row. TH is the first column on the left-hand side. That's what it is, right? And then what happens is we give it a scope of row. This is the attribute we're making. And we're doing this because of Bootstrap. We're just giving it some, basically it's going to style that column a little darker than the other ones. That's what it's going to do, all right? We set up our text content as counter, and we're going to take the counter number, whatever it is, and make that the text. So start off with 0, and then it'll go to 1, then it'll go to 2. However many items I have, it'll count that, and it'll add them in as an object, like an item, like item 0, item 1, item 2, that kind of thing, right? And then what I do is I take my table row, and I append child this the table headed the row, the first column. That's what I'm doing here. This is the first column, and I just add the first column to the row. So the row itself has the first column now, okay? Again, I haven't added anything to the actual screen. I'm doing everything offline first in my virtual DOM, okay? So I'm creating my elements, and once I've done my elements, I'm going to spit them out onto the screen all at once, okay? And now remember, this is in a for each loop. That means for each of the contexts, I'm doing the same thing, right? Now I've got this ugly loop, which I'm going to fix. I'm going to fix this in a bit. But basically what I do is create 3 more columns. 1, 2, 3. These are 3 columns. And what I'm doing here is I set the text content of each of the columns to whatever the name the properties are of my contact information. So name, number, and email, all right? And then finally, I take all that information, all the stuff that I've added into my table row, and I append it to the body. Okay, but the body needs to exist. And if you look in my contact.html, the body does exist. There's my T body. It's just another container, okay? Another node in my DOM, okay? So what's going to happen is it should all appear in here. This is where all the data should appear for my columns. And then based on, this is the table headers right now, and we're going to add another one later on, but I want my stuff to be in here. But my problem was that I was trying to do all this display data stuff, right, without a couple of things loaded. My JSON data has to be finished loading. So one thing I'm going to put in here is I'm going to do a console log inside my JSON data, and I'm going to say, or that basically is going to be not here, but actually inside here, that basically says that my data is finished loading. So I'm going to say something like, data finished loading. Why do I know this? Because in here, inside the body of this nested if statement, I know that the ready state change, if it works, I've gone and I've parsed my data from the file, and I can actually deal something with it. I can actually add it to my address book. So I know in this particular case, my data is finished loading. Okay, this is a great place to call display data, because my data is finished loading, right? I can display the data from there. Now, I'm only going to display the data, right? First of all, I'm only going to do this part if, and I'm only going to load JSON as an example, if my document.title is a contact. It's contact, right? So first of all, what I want to do, just to modify the load JSON data, remember, this load JSON function is specific to this address book, okay? Whenever you make a loader, any kind of loader in JavaScript, C++, C#, whatever language you want, right? Java, you have to make the loader specific to the data that you're loading. And you have to basically parse the data that you're getting from the file. And usually it's in some kind of text format or JSON format. You parse it the way you want. And then what you do is you serialize the data, or deserialize the data when you save it, and serialize it when it comes out. When I mean serialize is you actually take the data from the file, decode it, and actually connect it to your object. That's what you're doing. When you're serializing the object, and I'm saving it to a file, I take the object, split it up into its different parts, decouple it, and then spit it out as strings. And when I deserialize the object by bringing it back in, so serializing means I'm saving it, I'm decoupling it, and then I put it back together, right? I take it apart, and put it back together. And I keep doing that every time I save and load. Okay, one thing to note, by the way, about AJAX and data, you cannot save a file using AJAX. Okay, there is no way to save a file on the operating system using JavaScript. Can anyone tell me why that is? Why would I not be able to save a file to a server with JavaScript? Anybody? Come on, what about the guy in the red hat in the corner that doesn't speak too much? What would that be? Why can I not save a file on JavaScript? You have an idea? Security. Right? If I save a file, if I'm allowed to save files with JavaScript, right, as an example, and I spit it out onto the operating system, and if I can do that, because JavaScript I can actually do in the browser. So I can go on someone's browser, go to their site, make all my file physically in the browser, and make commands to save that file and inject a file into somebody else's server. That's totally insecure, guys. That would not be good. So AJAX does not allow you to save files. We can only read stuff with AJAX from the operating system. We can use AJAX to make API calls, though, right? I can use AJAX to send messages to a server, right? We're not sending messages to a server. This is all client-side stuff, right? So I can only read things. I'm just letting you know. So here, my data finished loading. And now that my data finished loading, well, you know what? I can probably display the data, right, when it's finished loading. I can't do this. I can't do this part, display data, until the data is finished loading. So here, instead of making an event, I'm just going to call display data. This is where my data is going to be displayed. So I'm going to call this function from my load JSON. Now, load JSON is not being called. You can see how it's grayed out, kind of thing, right? And what I want to do is in my load JSON file is now I got to think of when this is going to happen. All right, so now I'm going to back up one more step. I'm going to insert HTML. So I'm inserting HTML. I'm inserting HTML. Well, I want to check when I'm inserting HTML into my contact page. This is when I want to, and only there, load JSON, right? I'm not going to load JSON data on every page, only on the page that requires it, right? So now this is my convoluted single page application, and I'm going to show you an example, or I'm going to talk about an example where this would be much easier if you didn't have multiple pages. If you only had one page, it would be easier if you had multiple pages. It'd be much more difficult to do what I'm doing, right? Because I have one page and I'm making it act like multiple pages, and I have to wait for everything to load and all this kind of stuff. You don't have to do that if you're actually having real pages that I'm going to. If I'm going to my contact page or my about page, about that HTML, I don't have that here, right? So I have to think about it all in a sequence. I have to wait for something to load before I load something else. So here inside my insert HTML function, I'm just going to get rid of all this stuff because this is just for us, right? And I'm going to make it a little bit cleaner. In my insert HTML, I'm going to check to see that after the nav link is set, I'm going to see what the document title is. I'm going to say if document.title is equal to contact. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm in the contact page, right? That tells me I'm in the contact page. If that's true, then and only then do I want to load JSON, right? And what this is going to do is trigger a series of events. So I'm going to say, okay, load JSON. Load JSON is going to go through and load up the JSON, data finished loading. It's going to display the data on the screen based on the fact that everything has finished loading, right? This is all in sequence. One is a cascade for the other one, okay? But I changed the title with my history object, remember? In my history object here, take a look. In my history object, I have a route function, this route function way down here. What it does, it uses history.pushState and changes the document title, right? So the document title is going to be based on the hash of the link that I got from last week. Remember, I have my links and I have a hashtag, and what I'm doing is I'm faking the ability for me to do linking. I'm not really linking to any other page. I'm actually physically linking to the same page with a hashtag in the links. And if you remember that, that's a good question though. If you look at the partials in my header, I'm actually not going to an actual page. There's no home.html or about.html. I'm just using this hashtag, right? So the hashtag itself is going to be put on the URL on the top of my page, right? And what I'm doing is I'm going to parse this. I'm saying, hey, take the hash, this little hash object, which is location. Location is the actual URL on the bar of my browser, and then take that hash, whatever that hash is. So hashtag home as an example. slice out that piece, take the hashtag away, so sanitize the hash, the URL, right? And then I'm going to take my document.title and make it equal to that after it's been sanitized, after I've got rid of the hashtag, all right? That's what it does. That's what this document title does. And once I have this, my document title will change based on the item that I click. Doesn't mean that I'm really moving anywhere. I'm making it seem like I'm moving somewhere, but I'm not moving anywhere. I'm staying on the same page and injecting data with AJAX. That's what I'm doing. All right, so let's see if this works. Nice idea. This is a nice idea. And notice I'm not doing anything in my main. Main staying the same. I've removed it from main. I've updated everything. I'm going to put this up on GitHub in a second. But let's see if this is going to work, this series of steps. All right, so I'm going to go back to my page. And I'm just going to kind of go here and go contact, right? And there we go. And that's what you should see. I didn't change much, right? So how does this work? Again, what you're seeing is JSON data being loaded. I'm generating these table rows. Notice that this part here, this is the TH inside the column, special column that makes it bold. That's why I use the coding from Bootstrap. And what it does is it injects data, right? Now, if I ever want to refresh the page, if I want to refresh this piece of information, as an example, it's only going to give me the same piece of data, right? But what if I have new data incoming? Like, let's say, for example, I don't know, my JSON file is not where I'm getting my data, actually. Maybe I'm getting it from a database in the future, right? If my database gets updated by some user, right, then I want the update to be here if I refresh my page, or if I come back here. So I can't just do this, because if I already have this and I add append, what's going to happen is I'm going to append the same data underneath here again, right? I don't want to do that. So we have to change my display data function. Here's my display data function. And what I want to do is inside, once I make a reference to my tbody, I'm going to say something like this, tbody dot inner HTML. In this particular case, I'm just going to wipe it out, right? So what this does is it just cleans up that area. So if I had something there before, if I'm going to call this display data function again, it's going to clean it up and then regenerate it again, right? Otherwise, what's going to happen is it'll just add to everything. And I don't want that. I don't want to keep adding data, the same data over and over again down into my body. I want to only add the data that's relevant, right? All right, so we have some issues still. And before I'm finished putting this up as my final version, okay? This is not the final version. So I've got this, I've got my counter, I've got a for each loop, and then I got this real ugly area here that repeats, right? And I told you I want to fix this problem, right? I can make a loop, but I want to loop through each of the properties of my contact object, and it's a different loop that I need to use than a for or for each. I need to use a for in. So if I go to for, and if I go to for in, you can see that it's key value pairs, and see where it says has own property. Has own property basically checks to see if an object has a property, whatever the key value key is. Remember, the objects also are associative. There's an associative array for every object that you create by default, unless I tell it otherwise, right? So what I want to do is do this for in loop, and I want to change the key. So instead of key, we'll say this is the property that I want to display, right? So I'm going to call this thing property. All right, so that's the property. So for every property in my object, right? Oops. Every property in my object, this object here, right? My object, which object? It's contact, right? So the contact object, right? How do I know this? Because I'm inside this and this element here, for each contact, right? I want to go through each of its properties. So almost like another for each loop, but in a different way of doing it, right? And I need to do it this way because the for each loop won't work properly. So contact, and here, right? So what this is doing is saying, okay, for each property in the contact, if the contact has the property, then you want to check to see if it's there, right? That's the check, this line here. You really don't need this because we know it's there. If you didn't put that in, it's not gonna be bad. Nothing bad's gonna happen to you because we know it's already there. What I want to do here is I want to say that the stuff that I'm doing down here, I want to put in there, right? So I'm going to just take one of these examples, like right here. I'm going to cut it out this time. I'm going to put it inside here, and I'm going to work with this thing. So let's not call it TD1. Let's just call it TD. We can also call it column, whatever you want to call it. But TD gives kind of an idea of what kind of element I'm making, right? So I'm saying this something like this. I'm saying, okay, make a new TD, a new table data, new piece of table data. That's what I'm doing, right? And what I want to do here in this new piece of table data, instead of contact name, a specific thing, I want to take this contact property. So I'm going to take this part and put it here. Now what it's doing is it's looping through, right? It's looping through each of the properties that are inside the contact object, right? And it's saying, okay, for the first contact property, attach it to the row as table data. For the second contact property, attach it to the row as table data, and so on. And it keeps doing that over and over again, right? So this will be equivalent to all of that stuff, and I can get rid of all this. Now it's a little bit better, right? Because now this part I can't do because I'm specifically making a row that's a counter row and that has a different element type, the TH instead of a TD, right? But this I can do. I'm looping through for each of the elements. So basically loop through each property of the contact object. That's what I'm really doing, okay? That's what this little piece of code is doing, each property. And then what I'm doing is I'm adding the property onto the table row, and then add the property to the column. That's what I'm doing, right? So I'm adding that property to the column, the property value, right, if you will. All right, so that's what I'm doing with this little loop. So boop, boop, doing that. And then finally, I'm adding everything to the T body, the actual body of my table, right? Okay, so if I do this, and if I go back, and if I go to contact, you can see now it still works, right? It's just a little bit nicer, okay? Because I don't want to, it's just a lot of duplication, and I want to, I don't want to repeat myself. And that's one way of doing it. I could also change a bunch of other things here. I could change the type of loop. Instead of a for each loop, I could do a for loop or whatever. But here's what I want to show you. I've got this information. And then if I go back to my files, just for a second, let's go back to my files, and I go to my JSON data. Let's add another piece of data. So I got this data, and let's add another one. We can add as many as we want now, right? So we add another one, and we'll call this some other name. Mark Johnson, really white names. Mark Johnson 558, and Mark at example.com. So there's different people here, right? And I'll save this, and I'll go back, and if I refresh the screen, right, and I go back to my contact page, boom, I got Mark Johnson, no problem. And it appears. It'll just add, it'll keep adding data over and over again every time I go back to my contact page. It won't do it automatically because I'm not listening for a change to happen to my data.json file. I'm not watching my data file and to make that change. There is no two-way data binding right now. It's only literally just having to refresh my screen, right? It would be nice if we had two-way data binding. And if you want to do two-way data binding where if something gets updated, your screen gets updated automatically, then you got to use another way. You got to watch a file or basically have an observer that watches or connects to a database or a data file, and then when the data file changes somehow, or if you notify that the data file has changed, then you update your page automatically. We're not over near that, but let's suppose I want to be able to create have full CRUD on my page, right? So I want to have display. Right now I'm reading, right? I want to do create, update, and delete. Okay, I can't do create because I can't make a JSON file. I can't do update because I can't update the JSON file, and I can't do delete because I can't delete the JSON file. I can't do those things with a JSON data. I can only read. That's all I'm able to do with AJAX locally. Okay. One thing to note though is what if I wanted to structure my file so it looks like I can get ready for a database. Like right now, I'm mocking up the data. The data is coming from a JSON file. But remember, I can point my AJAX to look at a database. I don't have to I don't have to look at a data file. Right? So what if I wanted to inject other stuff in here? And again, this is more, remember I talked about, the DOM and BOM, and I said we would keep on working with the DOM and BOM throughout the next part of the semester because there's just so much to cover with the DOM. And I gave you some examples of using the DOM a little differently today and yesterday, where we kind of created elements like we did before, but specifically for an application to add the table data, all right? So what I want to do here is let's suppose I wanted to add a delete button, and I wanted to add a edit button. So I want an edit button and a delete button. And they're not going to do anything right now, okay? But let's suppose I want to do that. I want to create a structure for my application that automatically creates these things, okay? Now, there's a couple ways I can do this, right? But I want to do it with everything with my JavaScript, okay? So I'm not using jQuery. I'm not using anything else, just JavaScript to create my buttons. Well, first, I want to make a space for my buttons, right, in my contact page. So I could do this, programmatically, but, this is going to be static. So I'm going to kind of add 2 more THs, table headers, right? And they're going to be empty. So here's my first table header, and there's my second table header. Okay, so a couple of table headers. So it's going to increase. So it's going to change my structure of my table now. All right. So that's the first thing. So I add some space, columns. I add some columns right to my table. That's what I'm doing here. And then down in my T body, instead of doing what I've done with this part, I'm not going to stop here. I'm going to continue. So notice that I'm appending. This is the stuff that happens last. So I'm going to kind of push this down a little bit. All right. So I've done all this. I've added my stuff to my rows, and now I want a new button that I'm going to add to another column in the row, another TD basically, right? So I want to make a new TD. I'm going to call this one the delete TD, delete row, or delete column, and I'm going to have a edit column. So which one do you think I should do first? User interface tells me which one I should put first. Should I put the delete button or the edit button first? Which do you think I should put? Where should the delete button go? Towards the right or towards the data? Where do you think it should go? Towards the right. It tells you that you put the delete button as far from the user as possible, right? Because otherwise they're going to delete it by accident. We don't want that to happen. So I'm going to do 2 buttons, and the first one is going to be called the edit button. So I'm going to say let edit button. I'm going to create the edit button, right? I'm going to make a new document .create element, and I'm going to call this new element button, right? So there's my button element. Okay, I might as well do the other one. I'm going to kind of space them out. So I'm just going to kind of plan what I'm going to do here. So I need 2 buttons. I need another one called the delete button, right? Here's my delete button. I need my edit and my delete button. Okay, now before I add them in, I want to reference the row. I need also a row or a table data area for those buttons, right? So I'm going to say that I'm also going to say my let edit TD, right? Edit TD is equal to document.create elements. And again, there's different ways of doing this. This is not the only way. You could also use inner HTML to write a lot of data here, but I want to show you kind of the longer way of doing it. And then I can do the let delete TD equal to document dot same thing. I'm just going to copy paste here. So another TD. I'm actually creating I'm creating my structure programmatically here, right? All right, so there it is. So I'm making another one. So for my edit, my delete. So the TDs are basically the spaces, the slots that my buttons are going to go inside. So my button is actually going to sit inside of my edit TD, my table data, and my. So what I'm going to do at the end is I'm going to say something like, I'm not ready yet, but I'm going to say something like edit TD, right? Is dot append child edit button, right? Because I'm going to add my button to the TD to the column, right? And if you think of TDs as columns, that's what they are. They're table data. But if you're there, then I can do the same thing. So I'm going to say, okay, so I'm going to say something like delete TD, right? Dot append child, and then delete button. So I'm going to add the delete button to that particular column. Okay, so I got my buttons. I need to configure my buttons now. My buttons are there, but they got nothing, and they don't have no text inside of them. They have no style applied to them. Nothing. So let's style them. So in case of my edit button, I'm going to say something like edit button. All right, edit button dot set attribute. And I'm going to say my class. I'm going to set my class attribute. I'm going to set my class attribute to button. This is going to be the Bootstrap class. And this is my edit. So I'm going to button primary, right? And then I'll say button dash small. So I don't want a big button. I want a smaller button. Okay. And for this one, for my delete button, I want my class to be button primary. Instead of button primary, we're going to be button danger because it's a red button. Hey, don't delete unless you're absolutely sure, right? This will be the red button. Button danger, button small, right? So that's the first thing. So 2 buttons so far. They're looking identical. One is one has kind of a blue button. The other one is a red button. And now what I want to do is the text for the button. So the button, edit button. And I could say text content, but just hear me out. I'm going to say inner HTML here instead. All right. So this is my cheat, inner HTML. And I'm going to say in my inner HTML, I want to have, I could have done this differently. I want to have an I tag, right, with a class, right, that's equal to, I'm going to put a single quote there instead of double quotes, because you can put single quotes inside double quotes. And I want to show you this part as well, where it's FA, and then because it's my edit button, right, I want to make this some kind of icon that's an edit icon. So let's take a look and see what we have on Font Awesome. Let's say Font Awesome. And if I put in edit, you can see that there is this pencil, right? That's pretty common for the edit button. Okay, I can pick other ones, but let's pick this pencil. And if you notice what the pencil is, it's going to say something like FA-edit. I'm not sure that that's the right one. It may not appear. Let's also try pencil, right? Like one of these. There's edit, and there's pencil, or there's pencil square, and there's this one, pencil, right? So like this one, like an editor, right? But let's use this edit one. So if I say FA-edit, I don't know if it'll appear yet, and then FA-large. I want a large icon. Like it's going to go in there, okay? And that's going to be the item. And then next to the icon, I'm going to have the name edit, right? Because that's how it would appear inside of my button. Yeah. Yes, you can. You can modify that by targeting it with CSS. All right. So, okay. So then I want to do the same thing here. Notice I'm doing the same thing over, but they're slightly different, right? So my inner HTML of my delete button now is not going to be an edit. It's going to be trash, right? A trash can, right? So it's not going to say edit. It's going to say delete. Okay, let's see if this. So this I've made it, and I've appended it to my my edit TD, and I want to take my edit TD and append it to the TR, the table row, right? So I'm going to say something like table row dot append childs, and then edit TD, and then I'm going to say table row dot append childs, and then the delete TD. I've kind of taken those two, made them, and put them on here. Now we're not done. I'm just putting this is just initial stuff we're going to do with the button. The button could have an ID if I want to connect to it somehow. I could create an event listener. Right now, there's no event listener for the buttons. We're going to have to do all that stuff in a second. But notice the pattern. Almost like I'm duplicating, right? So, I mean, there's some stuff that I could loop, but this is unique. Like, what can you do? There's so many changes that you really can't apply a loop easily here. I could make it so that this is a function. I call a function that does all this, right? Actually does all the editing and adding the buttons. And what kind of button do I want? Do I want a danger button, or do I want this button? And depending on the function that I have, if I do these kind of buttons over and over again, I could create a button class that does those things and injects those kinds of buttons with a button class. So I make a class, and then I add this thing to the table row, and it's ready to go. A delete button or an edit button. And if I do it, delete buttons and edit buttons and add buttons and all that kind of stuff over and over again, I can have that part of my library somewhere where I just add them in, and they're ready to go. Okay? But right now, I'm not doing that. I don't have a case for that right now. So I'm saving this, and I'm going to go back to my site, and I'm going to go to contact, and yeah, I got my buttons, right? Nice, and it looks pretty good, right? They don't do anything right now. And here's the challenge, right? I want to, if in the real world I was going to create some kind of table like this, right? And I want to delete this record, all right, from my database. I don't have a database right now, but if I want to do it, I need some kind of reference to the element. Right now it's element 0, but it's a counter. I need to be able to keep track of that some other way. And the buttons need to know about this data. Unfortunately, my data does not have 0, 1, 2, 3. It doesn't have an ID that's incrementing, right? It has nothing. So I could, instead of my remember we talked about my counter, and I say counter plus plus? Meh. I put it in there because I'm automatically counting. But what if my ID is part of my contact database? Then I could do it differently. Let's do that first. So I'm going to go back to my database. So imagine if this is my database instead of a flat JSON file like this is. And instead of having name, number, and email, let's change the structure. All right, so I would have something like ID. And maybe the ID is going to be something that is given when I generate my data. So this will be ID 0. I can make it also a number instead of just a thing, because JSON takes numbers and strings and everything else, right? And I'm just going to copy this piece. Bear with me while I do it. ID 0, right? Now this is different, right? And it's going to screw me up in some ways. Okay, so I want you to tell me what all the changes I have to do to make this come into play, right? So I could do this. ID 2. Now I have to change my loader. ID 3. And then when I add another one, I'll change the ID to 4 or whatever, right? So these are all the IDs. Well, if I do this, and if I really want to have a class, then I got to change my class. So I got to go back to my class, which is inside of objects, contact, and my contacts need a class ID as well. So I'm going to say my contact, my constructor is going to be an ID, right? Is equal to da-da, and where my ID, I got to do this too, right? This dot ID, if I'm going to keep track of it, is equal to ID. I can do that, right? Back on my objects, right? So this has to change. And then my loader has to change. I got to go back to my app.js. And when I load everything, which is happening way over here, right? This is okay. This loads. But my display data, that ain't going to work anymore. Why? Because what I did here is I have a counter. And down in here, this loop, it's going to add an extra one because it's there, right? So I'm going to kind of add it in, and that's no good. So I'm going to check to see if the property, whatever the property name is not ID, right? If it's ID, don't worry about it. If it's not ID, you can do the rest, which means I have to put another if statement in here, okay? I have to do that because otherwise the property that is ID is also going to be added in as an extra column, and I already have that. I want to do that up here, right? Because I want to do this part. So instead of contacts counter, that's not going to be what it is. It's going to be, first of all, this objects, I want to say contact ID. I want to add that in there into my contact object, my new contact object. I need to do that because ID exists now in my database. It might change my structure, right? And then down in here, I'm going to actually put in my text content from my first column is going to be contact.id. All right, so that's where I want to go. So contact ID is here now. Yay. And then I got to check this one to make sure that I don't do this. I only add the one that's not ID. I don't want to add all of them. I'm looping through, but I'm checking the first one. I ignore the first one. So I kind of do something like if not, you know, well, or I can say if contact property, right, is not equal to ID, because that's what it's going to be, right? That's what then I can do the rest, not equal to. So I can kind of do all this, right? So I don't care about the ID. I want to skip it, and that's what I'm doing. I'm just kind of skipping over it. And there's other ways to do this as well. I could use a different kind of loop, you know, whatever, right? But here, what I want to do, I want to skip over that because I'll get that ID because I'm looping through all the properties, and one of them is ID, right? But I want to do something special with the first one. Now, I could also, instead of doing this, I could check to see if it's the other way. If my property is equal to ID, then do this, right? I could do that too. So only for that, I could put that in here, right? I loop through, and then what I do is I do the same thing. I say TD, I make a new TD, right? But I don't want to make a TD, I want to make a TH. So I just, depending on what it is, you know, I could put this part in here if I really want to. Okay, so we're pretty good here. So we're append child, and if we do everything else, let's see if it still works. I made some minor changes to the thing, and now let's see if I messed up. And well, yeah, I messed up, right? See that? It gets added in here, and I really want it to be added in here, right? So what happened here? What went on here? Well, because I'm actually adding extra children in here. This check, contact property not equal to ID. Well, it's not equal to ID. It's not equal to something else. So let's check and see what the property is before I do that loop, because I've got to fix that. So console.log, it's my checks, right? Property. And let's see what it gives me. And I want to do that over here in my inspector. And I want to go to my contact. And you can see that I have ID, name, number, and email. So it does go through ID. There it is. Right? Because these are the properties I'm reading. ID, name, number, and email. ID, name, number, and email. And I do that 4 times because there's 4 contacts. Right? So that's what it's doing. But then why this? Why is this happening? If I'm not doing this, I say if, right, this is true, if it's there, and if contact property is not equal to ID, then do this. But property is equal to ID, and it's still doing this, right? And how come this is failing? Like why? What's actually happening here, right? Well, a couple things are happening too, right? My contact property is not a string, it's a property, right? So that's something weird too. I could try and stringify it by going like toString, because everything has a toString method, right? By default. So I could try to do this, right? But you're going to see that I'm going to get the same result, right? Because this isn't the issue, right? So again, what I'm going to put in here is if I go through each case, here's the property. I'm going to take this property here and I'm going to put it to make sure that it's happening. I want to see that if it prints out the ID or not, right? So if it says ID here, somehow the ID's this check is failing, right? So contact ID. If the ID is printing, the check is failing, right? So this check, that doesn't do anything. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in here for this, the ID property, right? Does that make sense? So I'm looking at the contact. I'm saying that the property, whatever it is, if the contact property is toString, but this is the problem. I'm doing the wrong thing. What I really want to say is property. The property is what I'm checking is not equal to TD, right? And let's check that one out and see if I'm getting the proper thing. And now I'm okay. Okay, so contact property is actually the value of the contact property, right? This is the actual property itself that I'm checking, the property itself. Okay, so I don't need to do that. All right, so that is my solution for this. But why did I do all this stuff? Like, why did I bother going through all this restructuring stuff? Well, I want to know which one I'm going to delete, right? I want to know which one I'm going to delete and which one I'm going to do something. And I want to create another attribute that keeps track of the ID inside of my button. Okay, so what I'm going to do is when I want to edit or want to delete my buttons, I'm going to have this property that I'm going to use, right? So whatever the contact property is. But each button is because each button is being created programmatically, right? As an example, I want to store the property inside of a data attribute, my custom data attribute that I'm using. And you might see this sometimes if you actually say an API or some kind of library that's made by somebody else. You'll have a data dash something property, right? Okay. So what I want to do is create a new attribute for my button. So here I'll say edit button dot set attribute. And I want to call this data dash ID, my data ID property. And my data ID property is going to be equal to my contact, whatever my contact is, right? Dot ID. That's what I want. I'm actually storing my contact ID inside my button. Why am I going to do that, right? And it's going to be really long. Imagine if I was in a database and I had a really long 256 character hash, right? That's inside. I don't care. The user's not going to see it. It's just a piece of data that's stored in my button. And why would I do that? Because then I have the ID, and if I go back to the database, I can say, delete this one. right? And you'll see why. Now, I want to do the same thing here with my delete button. So my attribute, I want to say, you know, my delete button also is going to have this thing. And what I also want to do is create, you know, event listeners for each button. So when I click on the button, it's going to do stuff. But I also want to know which one I'm clicking on, right? So maybe I also want to add in, I mean, I've got my data ID. I really don't need an ID for each individual button unless I want to target it. I'm not targeting each individual button right now, right? But the data ID will be enough because then I know which ID is for this particular contact. I know what the ID is, right? And then what I can do is something like this at the bottom somewhere. I can say that edit button dot add event listener, right? Click, and I want to do kind of an inner function. Let's do the HTML6. Sorry, ECMAScript 6 fat arrow function. All right. So we'll say that for my edit button, I want to do a console log, and I want to say I want to print out deleting, or sorry, editing, and then editing item, and then whatever the item is, and we'll say, again, this is a template string, this dot data dash ID, right? Because the data ID, I want to get this. I want to say this dot get attribute. That's what I really want. And I want to get attributes data dash ID from my button. My button itself, when I say this, it refers to the button, right? For this button, get the attribute data ID and show me which one it is. And this is the way that I would access which item I'm going to edit or delete. Okay? And I want to do the same kind of idea here with my other button, my delete button. So I'm going to say delete button, and how about I do it properly? And then what I want to do is, instead of editing, I'm going to say deleting. Maybe it's going to have another operation. So I do my deletion here, I do my editing here. Maybe my editing, when I do my editing, I actually go to another page that allows me to edit data. And when I delete, it actually just deletes, sends the delete message to delete it from the database, right? So two different functions. One that actually goes to another page maybe in here, and another one that actually does something else, right? That actually deletes the data. I can't delete data. I can't edit data, not really officially from a JSON file, but we'll do some stuff in a second. Okay, so let's see if this works, first of all. Let's see if this changed. So some changes, I changed my structure of my JSON, so I have an ID for each of my pieces of data, each of the records, right, in my JSON file. And let's see if I can do that. If I go here and I press contact now, I got some error. All right, so it says edit button. Okay, I made a mistake. So I probably made an edit button delete. See what happens to me? Delete button. Try again. So la-la. And if I go to contact, now I have my delete buttons. And let's see what it says. If I click edit, it says, wah. It says uncaught, this get attribute is not a function. This dot get attribute, right? So again, just like we set attribute, which is, we did that here, set attribute, th, right? Delete is what we're talking about, and get attribute is a function, because if I look at this is a button, HTML element, right? Button element. The button element could have attributes, which I've added in here, right? So I want to get the attribute as opposed to set the attribute, right? So this should work, right? I could also be explicit. I could say something like delete button dot get attribute, right? I could do that. Or I could say this dot or event dot, if I put an event in here. I could also do event dot current target get attribute, whatever button I'm clicking on, right? Event dot current target. And let's try that. So I'll put the event here. Another way of doing it. Let's see if that works. deleting 0, deleting 1, deleting 2, deleting 3, deleting 1, deleting. So I can check. Each button knows which item it's deleting, right? And same thing with this one. I can edit 0, edit 1, edit 3, edit 2, and so on. So it knows which one is deleting. So now I have access to which button is doing the business, whatever it's going to be doing, right? So this is really good. The buttons know which one it's going to do. It looks pretty cool. And I can add, for every new piece of data, it's going to have these buttons. And they're dynamically being added based on the amount of data that I have in my JSON file. Okay? Any questions so far about this stuff? How to do all this stuff? Now, it looks like big pieces of data that I'm at, like big swaths of code, but it's actually repeated over and over again. As you can see, again, this is crying to me. It's crying for some kind of function. That's what it's doing. It's saying, hey, I need two functions. One to make delete buttons, and the other one to make edit buttons, right? I'm not going to do that here, right? Because remember, it has styling. Like I've done everything here: styling the button, adding attributes, creating the button text, all that kind of stuff is being here, and then adding even the event listener for the buttons. So each button has its own event listener. All right, so pretty cool the way we did this and all this kind of stuff. But really, like we talked about, we cannot save or load any data. And we also have this other, we can load data. We can't save or edit or delete the file. We can't do anything like that. We can't create new files. And sometimes what we do is we use JSON data. And what we do is we want to kind of, we kind of load things in memory. So I don't use the JSON file. As an example, I have something in my, I want to persist some kind of data in my browser. I can do that. And going back to your book talks about state and saving things with web storage. Now, web storage is something that a lot of programmers don't know about somehow. All right. It's been around for a while, like since 2010, I would say, even earlier than 2010, and being supported by most browsers way before that too. But how does it work? Well, there's two parts. And if I look at web storage on the internet, if I kind of search for web storage, there is really two different forms of web storage that are safe to use. One is the local storage object, and the other one is session storage. Okay, so those two objects, local storage and session storage, are the two ways you can actually save data safely on your browser. There's also cookies, but cookies are slowly being deprecated. We want to get away from cookies because cookies can actually go, you can go in there and modify the cookie data, right? Although a lot of people still use cookie-based authentication, believe it or not. So cookies are another way to do it, and cookies is a piece of data that's physically stored on your browser. That's physically what's happening, right? So you actually look at your cookie if you really want to. How do I look at my cookies and my data? Well, if you go to my contact page in this particular case, and if I open up my inspector, I don't only have a chance to look at my console, but there's something else called application. Take a look over here, application. Under application, you can see that, I'm going to pull this over a little bit so you can see it more. You can see that I have a bunch of different things here, right? I have local storage. Right now I have nothing. I have session storage. Nothing. I have cookies. Let's see what kind of cookies I have. And cookies for my local host. I have a couple cookies in here. Look, notice that I have these two cookies. One that was put in there from WebStorm, and another one that was put in there from some kind of I/O, it says. And I can read the cookies. They're the values right there. I can read the data for my cookies. And so, why? It's totally insecure, right? It tells you the size of the data, right? It shows you that it's not secure, right? And that's why cookies are bad. Cookies basically store data right here on the browser, and they persist unless you clear the browser cache. So similar to cookies, we have two different forms of storage, one called local storage and one called session storage. And like their names, session storage expires when you close down all your browsers. So if I close down my browser, if you want really sensitive information to be stored on the browser, then you put it in session storage. For example, your username and password, or your username, like you're just logged in as an example, right? You put it on session storage, and then when the browser closes down, it's gone. You're not logged in anymore, right? Local storage is different than session storage in that it does not expire. It's like similar to cookies. So it'll stay in there forever. How do you store local storage and session storage? What's the format? Well, notice there's key value pairs. So you can store a key, like a variable name, and a value, the variable value. So I can actually store variables here in my browser, right? Well, if I go there, if I can store variables in my browser, instead of loading the JSON and actually loading it into a contact object, I can load my JSON and I can literally store it in my local storage, right? That's where I'm going to be loading from. And when I'm loading it from local storage, I can actually load it into local storage. And then local storage, I can manipulate it. This is where I can do deletes and adds and all that kind of stuff to simulate what it would be like if I was using a database. Okay? So first of all, let's add stuff to local storage. And there's actually 3 commands that you need to know for local storage and session storage. They're the exact same commands. Set item, seriously. Remove item, right? Get item. And one more, clear. If you do any of those things, right? Set item, actually add an item. Remove item, removes the item. Right? Get item, gets the item. And then clear clears the entire session storage or local storage. That's what it does. Those are the commands you need to know. That's it. There's literally only 4 commands. Yeah.
So we can selectively clear the records. So.
Yeah, you can just say remove item, right? So, but remember, I'm only doing it locally. I'm not doing it on my JSON file. My JSON file can't touch, right? But I can modify data that's physically in memory if I want to. That's something else. IndexedDB is, there actually was something before that called WebSQL. It's old. It's an old standard that's going to be deprecated. It's going to be removed, right? And IndexedDB, there is a way of creating a local web-based persistent database that stays in your browser. But if someone wants to go in there and wipe it out, then it's gone. All the web data is gone. So it's a little web-based database. And for simple applications, it's pretty cool. So why have an IndexedDB and as well as local storage and session storage? Well, there's 2 parts. One, local storage or session storage has limitations. One, you cannot store objects officially. I'm putting officially with quotations, hanging quotes here. Officially, I can't store objects. I can store numbers. I can store Booleans. I can store strings. I can't store arrays. I can't do any of that stuff. Only really the primitive data types I can store in local storage and session storage. All right? Whereas in my IndexedDB, it can take any kind of data. You can store all kinds of them, even pictures, blobs, if I really want to, right? The API for IndexedDB is not easy to learn. Okay? It's going to take, if I was going to show you IndexedDB, which I wouldn't because I don't use it, I'm telling you right now, I'd rather use MongoDB or something else, like a real database, right? There's some limitations on what you can do from an IndexedDB perspective. It's really cool stuff you can do locally, and if for a short-term temporary basis, using something like a local copy of your database in IndexedDB is very cool to do, all right? Like what we're going to do today with my JSON data, all right? So how do I do this? How do I store then JSON data with session storage or local storage? First of all, let's do it with session storage. I told you, WebSQL is deprecated. We don't use it anymore. All right. So, so how do we do this thing? So we're loading JSON, and we're parsing it into our text. We're parsing our text back into JSON. We're saying using JSON.parse to parse our stuff we're getting from the data file, right? Okay. At the same time that I'm loading the data, though, let's inject it into session storage. Okay. And it doesn't matter where session storage or local storage. So we'll say, make another function here. It doesn't matter where. Maybe I'll put it down here. Remember, all the functions are hoisted. It doesn't matter. So I'll say something like, insert data to session storage, right? And this insert, I'll call it right here. Before I display the data, I want to insert data to session, right? Which is what I'm going to do here, right? And the way to do that is to say something like, I'm going to pass in the data. So I'm going to pass in this response text. So this dot response text. Okay. I'm passing it in. So I'm going to kind of get it in here. And this will be the data I'm getting, right? So I pass it in. I take the data. And now when I got my data, I want to parse it and stringify it. So I'm going to say something like data dot, and you can do that, JSON dot stringify, right, data. And what this does is it actually converts the data from string back to JSON, actually. Makes it into JSON kind of format, right? Back to string. So it makes it into a string. Takes that data, serializes it, and puts it in as a string, okay? And then what I want to do is I want to say that I want to take this information and add it to session storage. So I can say that, remember, the session storage object is part of the window. So I can say window.session storage, right? But you can just use session storage because then the window object is implied. So session storage dot set item. And what I want to do is I want to take this data. If I put it in here, that is the data value that I'm going to get. The value of my data is going to go in here. Because remember, I'm getting response text, right, as an example. And the response text that I'm getting is everything. It's like the whole data object, right? Actually, what I probably should do is pass in address book. That's what I probably should do, right? Because address book itself is just a variable. I've already parsed it, address book, right? And if I pass in data, I want to stringify it back out. But I want to get address and only parts of the address book, the context part of the address book, right? So I could do it here. I could do this here. Maybe this is not the right place to do it. Let's think about this again. Let's not do it here for a second. Let's do it when, I'm going to come back to this. Let's do it when I'm doing this, my contacts. This makes more sense, right? Because now I have my contact object, right? So here's where I'll call my insert data. So I'll say something like insert data to session, and I'll pass in the contact. That's easier, right? Contact. So when I pass in my contact, it's an actual object, right? So when I come in here, right, to my insert data, where did I put it? I must have missed it. It's an object, right? And what I want to do is I want to stringify the object. So whatever the data is, this is good. But I want to take that for the first part. I want to say data, my object.id is going to be the first part. So there's two parts to set the item, if you notice. There's one part is the key, and the other one is the actual value, right? Key and value. I want to stringify the data, but my data, this data includes the ID right now, right? Because here's my ID, and here's the data. It's going to have the ID in it, right? That's bad. So I want to kind of go through it, and I want to kind of build up my string of all the data that I stringify, right? Kind of thing. So I could do a for loop, a for in. And in my for in, what I want to do is I want to create my data string to insert, right? So I could say that let data string, right, equal to, and I want to take the data that I have. So I could say something like data dot, instead of ID, I know what I'm getting. I know that I have the parts of my data that I have right now is, because data is a type of contact. I have a name, right, plus my data dot contact number. I can't remember. I always forget this stuff. Number, right? Number plus a space, right? But I'm going to put my hand up here. I'm talking about there's a problem if I do it this way, okay? If I did this and it's already a string and I pass it in, then I'm going to have some information, but it's all separated by, I think if I make it comma separated, I could do this so that these are all commas. These are data number, you know, whatever. And this is cool, but this is just a value. So I could do that and pass it in. I could do that and pass it in. The other way to do it is I could just eat it and just say, well, my data includes it, but all I care about is I want to capture the data ID here, and then I can store it in here, right? So I could do it this way too. So if I did this, let's just try this way first and show you what I'm going to get, because you guys don't even know what this is going to do, right? So when I insert the data, I'm doing it when I display everything. And when I come to here, watch this over here. If I go to my contacts, and if once I get that, then what it's supposed to be is inside my session storage, I get this. It actually stores my key, 0, 1, 2, 3, and then I get all my data in here. Notice it's actually proper. If I stringified it like I was showing you, I would have to really spend time parsing it. And I wanted JSON data like this because I want to be able to bring it back in, right? So notice that this is actually a string, right, that has these properties, right? And when I hover over each one of these, I'm going to get data right in here, right? So when I read it back in, I'm going to parse.json or json.parse the object back in to kind of, so I can load it in with my JSON and push it back out, with my, so what this does is inserts it to session. If I want to also insert it into local storage, let's do that. So let's say function insert data to local storage, right? I pass in data. I'll do the same thing, exact same command, right? But instead of going to session storage, it's going to go to local storage. And you can just change this name to local. It's the exact same command. Done. So, it's just a use case. Why do I use session storage? If I want something to disappear when I close my browser, session storage. If I want something to always persist, example would be something like, okay, I want to know the user that comes back to my website when he's, who is he and what his preferences are, right? So if I know that when Tom comes into my website, I want to know that his preferences are he wants a dark theme. So I want to actually show a dark theme to the user because that's the preferences that he has. I can store all those preferences in local storage, right? It's really kind of cool. And I can store my preferences as a stringified JSON object, right? And then when I read it back into my database, I can say, well, here's his default settings that he likes. He likes that, Tom likes that the theme is dark. He wants this option turned on, this option turned off. He doesn't want to see this or whatever. And I can store all of that in local storage. And when I want to store things like, hey, what's my shopping cart? I can store my shopping cart in session storage. So when I close my browser, shopping cart cleared, right? Shopping cart is just an object. And when I have my shopping cart, when I'm done, I can close my browser and the shopping cart information is finito, right? Or I can use it in local storage. I can also store my shopping cart in my local storage, which is persistent, right? But then what I can do is I can have a timer that times it out. So after a certain amount of time on the server, it'll time out, and then it'll clear my session storage or my local storage. I can do that too, right? Different use case. But I want to show you that it's exactly the same. That's what I want to show you here. So if I take this, and if I go down in here, and if I say insert data to local storage, and I pass in my contact information, then when I go back, you can see now it's not only here, but also here, right? If I go to my contact, there we go. Okay, so it's here and here. Oh man, how do I clear this stuff? Well, to clear the session storage, I would just close down my browser, right? Can't close down my browser because I'm broadcasting. That would be bad. And I have to close everything down, right? And just to close down my local storage, again, it would persist forever. I could delete it by having a remove item or each individual item. So let's try that. So let's go to, I want to remove item 0 from local storage and see how I can do that. So I'm going to go back to my console here and say something like local storage dot remove item, and then I want to remove the first item 0, right? And then if I go back to my application, you can see that item 0 is gone. That's how easy it is, seriously, right? And then if I want to clear everything, I go back to my console and I can say something like local storage dot clear. I go back to my application, it's gone. Same thing for my session storage, right? I want to get item. Let's do a get item from session storage now, right? So I'm going to go get item. I can say that session storage dot get item, and then I want to get item 0. Here it is. It's literally stored on the browser. That's where it is, like physically on your machine, right? And if I want to clear it again, session storage dot clear. And then if I was trying to try that other command again, if I went to this, get item 0, I'd get null because it doesn't exist. So then, if we can do that kind of stuff with session storage and local storage, right? And if I load my JSON data onto my browser, right? When I click delete, what I can do is the displaying happens not in the, I'm actually going to remove the contact object, right? That's what I'm going to do. Because here so far in this example that I've used, and by the way, let me put this up on GitHub for you guys so you have this so far. So this is created dynamic table data, right? In contact form. Contact, I guess contact page, kind of. Not really a page, but it's kind of like a page. And I modify my JSON file and blah, 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 and whatever. And let's just put this up on GitHub. So you have this information. All right, so here's where I make my changes. So what I want to do here is, this is neat, right? And I do this part. But I'm actually getting my data right now. Like all this data is coming from my contact ID. And the contact ID right now, notice I'm loading it up inside of my contact array, right? So here I'm keeping hold of a contact array, and without session storage or local storage, as an example, I can just remove my item, right? How do I remove items from an array? Well, I push items on. I can actually look at that particular ID on the array and remove that as well, right? But I don't know where the array is, and I want to be able to find that particular item and remove it, right? So when I go here to remove the item, so here's my event listener. When I'm deleting an item, right? I want to delete it, but I also want to update my page somehow. So let's do that. So I'm going to say something like my contacts page, my contacts array, and what are the options I have, right, for my contacts page? Well, I have a lot of different options if it was an array. So let's look at array options for you guys to see them. Actually, we'll do them. I'm not getting in here because there's no code hinting, because I don't know what kind of object it is, because I'm using vanilla JS, right? So it doesn't give you any code hinting. But down in here where we defined our array, which inside of my start method, where I said that start is equal to this, contacts is equal to this. I know that contacts can actually be used like pop, push, reduce, reverse, shift. Remember all these things we can do? So remember what pop can do, right? So if I kind of look up, I can say that pop, it removes the last element from the array. That's not what I want. I don't want to pop the last element off, right? And what other things can I do? I can also fill, find basically returns the value of the first element in the array, where whatever the predicate is, which is up here, the predicate is true and undefined otherwise. So we're looking for some kind of array where I'm looking for a value for that array, an associative value. I don't have an associative array. I have an array with an ID, right? So I want to search to see where the array has that ID, and I'm doing a search algorithm, right, on my object, right? Now, because it's an array, it's not a database, there is no way of removing item. I can't remove item, right? I haven't created that kind of thing. I can look at the index of, right? So I can say, hey, give me the index of some element, right? I want to find the element that I'm searching for, this particular element, whatever it is, right? So I'm removing this contact, but which contact is it? The contact that has ID. So I could do that, right? So that's my way of doing it. I could also look at, kind of looking at all the options that I have. I could slice. So I could say the beginning of the specified portion of the array, I could just get rid of it. That's not good, right? I could splice, removes elements from an array, and if necessary, inserts new elements in their place. So splice would do it. Splice actually removes an element, whatever that element is. So you take that element, get rid of it, right? But I need the start number and the delete count, right? And notice the delete count is an option. How many numbers I'm going to delete? 1, 2, 3. I want to delete one item in a particular location, start number. This is the way to do it, right? I know my ID in this case because of my JSON data. It's 0, 1, 2, 3. It's exact same. I'm keeping track of my array in this particular case, right, by the number. But when I delete an item, right? That ID doesn't mean anything anymore. Does that make sense? Because my ID right now is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that's just the way I've created it. But when I delete number 3, it's not going to reorder the IDs. It's not going to change the IDs to some other number. It's going to be the ID that it was. And I'm making ID 0, 1, 2, 3, but it could be in the future ID 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 5, 6, B, A75 or something like that, some weird hash, right? And it may not make any sense from an array index perspective like it does right now. So this won't work. I need to find the object. And I can do, for now, I could do kind of a search, right? Now notice it says that there's a bunch of things I can do here to, to search. I could do a find. Find might be the best thing I can do, because find built in. I don't have to do a sorting, searching algorithm. That would be bad. Go back to your algorithms class for that one, right? I'm not going to do that. But what it does, it looks for some kind of value, find index of a particular value, and I got to set that all up. So for now, because we're going to just keep it simple, because we don't have this kind of structure, there is no way of deleting a specific object, because my array is kind of an array of objects, right? What I want to do is I want to search through each of the objects that I want to delete and delete it. So I want to kind of say something like, if I want to delete this item, I want to go to my contacts, and I'm going to say, if, first of all, the item exists, and it would, because if the item is showing, we can assume that it exists. If it didn't exist, it wouldn't show, right? So I'm going to say something like, the item right now is going to be based on ID. So I'm going to say that I want to look through the contact information. I want to search through the contacts array. And notice if I want to remove, right, I want to splice, right? So array.splice is what I'm doing. And in my splice, notice I get a start number and a delete count. And the splice number is going to be my data.id. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that's my data ID. By chance, my data ID is the number, right? So I'm going to say something like, and if I was going to be smart, I would take this information here, right, that I've done, and I'm going to make it a little local ID. So I'm going to say let ID equal to this, right? Because I would do that. I might as well do this, by the way, for my editing as well. Might as well do that in here. And then I can put in my ID in here, right? So I could do this. Oops. Okay. Okay. And now what I want to do is I want to splice from the ID, whatever it is, right? And the number, which is 1, right? The number of elements to remove. One element I want to remove, as an example, from that particular number. Okay? Let's see if that works, first of all. So I want to splice that contact up. And then afterwards, and this is kind of funny what I want to do, I want to call display data again. So it's kind of recursive in some ways, right? But this is the way we've written it. So I want to call display data. I basically want to update the data again. So I'm going to call it, and I'm going to remove it, and it's not going to have this anymore. All right, let's see if that works. So let's see, in all its glory, I'm going to go to my contact page. I got my data, and I want to delete this one. And let's see what I got. I clicked it, but I got deleting item 1, and then I displayed the data again. Let's see if I refresh the data from my, now remember what's happening is this, right? My data is being reloaded by my JSON object and being put back in, right? Right? So that doesn't make any sense, right? Because of the way I've set this the file up. The idea, my logic is correct, but this whole idea of a cascading order of stuff because of the JSON data that's being loaded in. The idea here is good, but the problem is that when I load my data, when I display my data, what's happening is I'm going through each of the contacts again, right? And my storage my storage is here. Let's not do this. This is just for an example of how to do session storage and local storage. I don't care about this anymore. I want to do something else. Okay. I'm loading it. Okay. And here's my counter now is not being used, by the way. I can get rid of this because my counter is useless because I'm using my ID now more than anything else. There's my contact ID, right? And so here's my data ID, whatever it is. I'm deleting it. That's what the ID that I'm deleting, which is right here. I'm saying, hey, go there into my contacts array and delete it. All right. So just to show this that it's working for us, let's just display my contacts thing, just to show you this. So contacts log, and I'm going to do something like my contacts. Let's show the contacts array. All right, just by default. So I'll go in here and go back to here, and I load it in, and oh man, it says counter is not defined. And of course, I'm countering plus plus. I never deleted that part. I don't need to do this anymore because we don't need to counter plus plus anymore, right? Because I don't need a counter because I have an ID. There we go. Let's try it again. And as an example, I'll click the first one, and what do I get? It says, "Here's my data." What happened here? But look, my data actually has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it actually deleted 1, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, right? It deleted the first one and then added these ones in. Okay, cool, but how come it doesn't show it here? Right? I should see 6 elements here, not 4 elements. How come I'm only seeing 4 elements? That's weird, right? And if I refresh, and if I go back to this and click contact, I still only see 4 elements, right? If I click delete, I deleted the middle one. Look, I deleted, says 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and it says the one number 1 is gone. I actually deleted it from my, I did it right. It deleted from my database, from my, from my array. My array's gone, but then I added it back in again, right? Because I read the array again. So I build up my array again, right? Let's go back to that. So what I'm doing here on the top is I'm building up my array. For each object in my array, I'm doing this. If my array is, it's almost like I want to redo this stuff from my contact. Notice the contact itself. For each object in context in address book. That's what's happening. I'm looking at my address book contacts, and for each one of those, I'm building it up. I only want to do that one time, right? My display data shouldn't be doing this for everyone, every time. It should only be looking at my contacts array. So it should be this, right? That's what it should be, not address book contacts. Address book contacts should be built up, right? It should build this stuff into my array. And this is actually wrong too. For each contact in my array, right? I'm pushing a contact onto my array. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do this in here. So I'm going to undo that change. Oops. I don't want to do this here. This came back, so I did too many times. Because what's happening is when I'm calling display data here, my display data is happening here, and I want to call display data over and over again. But for the first time, I want to build up my contacts array. So I want to do this piece right here one time. So let's do that. Put that up. And I'm going to go over here. And we're going to say, we're going to make a new function called, kind of create contact array. Create, just so we know what it is, create contacts. Create contacts. How about that? We don't have a function like that, but we'll make it. It's going to be right here. Function, create contact. I'm just splitting it up so it makes it easier to look at, right? And it might create contacts. What it's going to do is it's going to say, hey, take my address book, right? Like I did before. All this stuff right here. Do this here in my create contacts, right? And of course, I got to close all this off properly because it's got to be closed up like this, right? So this little loop here, it pushes all my contacts for only one time onto my contact array, all right? So my contact array is what I want to use, not my address book. My address book, it only loads once from my JSON file, right? I load my JSON file up. When I display data, I don't want to loop through each of my contacts in my address book. I want to loop through each of my contacts in my contacts array, right? And I don't want to do this. I don't want to set up a new contact, all that. I've already done this, so I can get dispensed with this part. Does that make sense? My contacts array already has everything because I'm doing it here. I'm kind of setting up all my contacts. I'm pushing all my contacts from my JSON data to an array. Now, remember, this part right here could be done with local storage. No array. I'm pumping out from local storage. I'm saving in local storage. I'm working on local storage, and then I commit my changes to the database sometime later. All right? So if I did this, and if I go down here, let's see if it worked first. I'm good because I'm doing the same thing. Now, if I click delete, I only have 3 items. If I click this one, oh, wait, what happened? It says deleted number 3. Why did it delete? Why did this fail? Because there is only 3, right? ID and 0, 0, 1, and 2, and now I got a problem, right? Because I'm trying to delete by index. I'm not deleting by ID. Where my contact my ID is equal to 0 or my ID is equal to 2. So I got to do something slightly different. So down in here, in my contacts, right here, what I want to do is when I splice, I don't want to splice based on my ID. My ID is equal to my data ID. I want to splice based on this is the actual ID of my in the array. So when it's something like ID is the actual contact of the object that I'm deleting, right? So this is the ID is okay. This is good, right? But when I delete, I'm not going to splice here. I'm going to splice the ID of the object that matches whatever that is, right? So I can say something like, okay, well, I'm searching for an ID in my database, in my array. So I can say like, I do another for each loop, right? So I can say kind of for each. Look for each of the items in there. This is a long way. Now imagine if I had a big array of 1,000 items. Too long. I have another way of. I'd have to create a way of sorting and searching. And if you wanted to search for a piece of data, the for each loop looks for each of the objects inside of my array. So for each, I want to do this one. So in my array, which is my contacts array, for each contact in my contact array, if contacts.id, right, is equal to ID, this ID, right? Then I found the right ID to delete, right? Then I want to do contacts.splice contacts.splice contact. I want to get rid of that. I want to get rid of that contact. I want to remove or delete that particular contact. But I don't know. Remember, because I'm doing an index-less kind of thing. So I want to remove, right? I want to kind of a way of removing an element from the array. I can't do a splice anymore. Splice, I have to know the exact the index of that position, right? So I want an index of. I want to have index of my of that particular contact. Let me just go back to this. I'm going to check my API. So array index of, and I want to look at my W3 schools a little bit cleaner. So banana, orange, apple, mango, fruits, index of apple, 0, 1, 2, right? So wherever my ID is apple. Now these are strings. I'm not looking for strings, but I am looking for contacts. So I'm looking for that particular contact, right? So fruits index of apple is the index. So I can say something like where my contact itself, for each contact where the contact ID is equal to ID, right? Then what I want to do is contacts index of contacts. I want to get that index. That's what it's going to return, the index of the contact. And then I want to contacts.splice that index by 1. I'm getting the index of the contact based on the content that I'm sending in, the one that matches the IDs, right? Searching through, I find the first element that matches the ID, and then I remove it, whatever that index is. And that's a different removal. That's a different removal than what I had before. I get rid of this. See if that works. Again, this is terrible because I'm looping through each of the contacts in my array. Every one, if there's 1,000 contacts, I'm looping through, going through each one of them in a linear fashion. There's other ways of searching through the array, and we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so let's go back and see if that works. So again, I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to my contact. Notice I got them all, right? And I'm going to click delete. And now it says, well, contacts index of okay. Try that again. Delete. We're good, right? And now if I delete this one, deletes that one too, or this one, no problem. This one, it's all gone, right? So we can delete all of them based on the number that I want to find. Now, if I want to search for an item in the array, now if I want to search, so array search JavaScript. If I go back to index we did, find, it doesn't do what we want. So here's an example of, and we haven't done array methods. We're actually supposed to do that a couple weeks ago. So this is a perfect segue into that, right? If you notice how it works is find returns the value of the first element in an array that pass a test, provided as a function. So you have to actually pass it as a function. So the syntax is kind of funky. It looks like, here's my ages array, right? And what I want to do with the ages array is, in this particular case, this example is 4, 12, 16, and 20, right? And I want to find whatever the value of check adult is. So check adults, if my age, whatever the age is, right? I'm getting the value of my age to check, whatever my value is, right? And it's basically saying that the age that I'm checking in this particular case is, let's say 18, whatever it would be, right? Here's my value, 18, right? My value to check. If age is greater than or equal to the document.getElement by ID age to check dot value, and age to check is 18, right? So if this age, whatever age I pass into it, right? And I'm using check adult, right? So this function here, I'm passing into the find, and this function here does all the checking for me. So it's going to return true or false. It's going to return true or false. So I have to make the statement that I made before, which is that little function that I created, right? Which is going to say if my ID is equal to ID, that's the check. That's going to return true if my ID is equal to whatever the ID is for my data, the button that I picked, right? And then I can pass that check as a function, because this takes a function call, back into ages.find, right? Because it's going to pass in. Now, how does it work? It says that whatever age I pump into the this item here, as an example, it's going to come from ages. Does that make sense? So ages is going to take each of these elements. It's going to look for each of these elements, pass in the age parameter into this element. So for each element in ages, it's going to pass it into this function. That's how it works, right? And this particular function, now it's written here as a separate function, but it can be written here as a inline function, right? So this function here can be written in here. So if we were going to write this together to use the find method, which is a better way of searching the way I did, which I did through a for each loop, which is terrible, right? It's kind of the same thing, but instead of context.forEach, I'm going to do context.find, right? Context.find. And what I want to find, right, instead of this part right here, let me actually do it separately so you can see the difference. Context.find. And then I'm going to do a function, right, where I'm going to have an anonymous function to do some kind of finding, right? That's what it's going to do, all right? And notice that context.find is going to return the contact that matches, right? Because it says that a document.element by ID demo, it's going to equal to ages above. It's going to return each of the elements that I want, right? For each of the elements. Okay? And notice it says context.find, right? So I want to return all of them that match, right? I'm only going to return one in this particular case, right? And the check is going to be, I want to pass in whatever the contact is that I'm getting, right? My contact that's based on my ID. I can say that I want to pass in ID, right? Because I already have this element. The ID is the data ID, right? And then I'm going to return true if my ID, right? Just like it says here, my contact ID is equal to my ID, right? So contacts.id is equal to ID. Now, going back to this example, it says that I'm getting my age. My age is coming from here, right? That's what's happening. Ages, I'm passing in my age. I'm actually getting my whole contact. So this shouldn't be a contact. This should be contact. So here's my contact. Return true if my contact.id is equal to my ID, which is coming from here. And that's what it returns, right? Now this context.find, right, as an example, is going to return a variable. It's going to return something, this whole thing, right? Whatever the contact is that I want to find. And that's the one that I want to delete. I want to splice that one. So I'm going to say something like, let contact, or let contact to delete is equal to this, because basically what I'm doing is context.find takes an internal function, returns the contact to delete. That's the one I want to delete, right? And then I want to do this contact.splice stuff, right? I want to do context.splice, contact to delete, 1. So this is the way it should be done. So instead of doing it this way. So let's just try this out. If we did it right. If we didn't. This returns a Boolean, true or false, right? I take my contact. Contact is the actual element. It represents the element, right? The parameter. And this element that I'm getting, it gets from, I go through the contacts array. So the contacts array, it looks at this element, and I say if contact ID is equal to ID, ID being this ID right here, right? Then I'm going to return the contact to delete. This is going to be the actual contact itself, right? I'm returning the actual contact of the one I want to delete. And then I'm getting the index of that contact and splicing it up. Whew. If it works. Let's see. Save, home, contact, and delete, and delete, and delete, and delete. A much more efficient way of doing it this way than using a for each, because for each does it sequentially, right? Yeah. Make sense? Again, I'm refining as I go, right? So I start off, I have an idea. This is coding 101 for you guys, right? I have an idea, I make it work, my algorithm, and then I refine the algorithm. I do a refactor, and this is what I've done. I refactor my algorithm over and over again until I get the smaller piece of code that's more efficient. Find is pretty good. Remember, it's part of JavaScript. I didn't make it. That means you can probably trust that it's pretty efficient. Okay? And notice index of, it actually finds the element that I want to look at, this particular element, and removes it. Splices it out. All right, so I know I'm kind of using one and another and kind of referencing, and then I'm calling this recursively, right? Because what this does is actually calls the function that this whole thing is part of. It's calling the display data function, which is actually where my button is being defined, right? So it's kind of, when I delete it, it actually calls itself. And then, because it makes sense, right? It makes sense to call itself, because then what I can do is I can go back and rejig what my data is being displayed as, right? And I'm all doing this in the context of AJAX. So I'm using AJAX to do all this kind of stuff. I'm juggling all these things in the air kind of thing, right? Let's take it one step further. So right now, what we've done is we've done it so that, let me just do, I'll say that we've added delete functionality, right? So we'll do that here. We'll say added delete functionality, right? And I could kind of continue this with the whole edit functionality as well, right? If you really want to think about it, because now we're editing the array. I'm not editing the JSON file. JSON file is immutable. I can't touch it. But I can modify my array to make it look like I'm modifying my context. I can add a new contact too, right? So one thing I'm missing here is add a contact. How do I add a contact? I need some kind of page to do my editing. And my edit page is going to be able to do edit as well as add, right? That's what it should do, my edit page. I don't have an edit page, but I can make an edit page. It'll be virtual. It'll be another content page that I'll create. It'll be the edit page, right? And my edit contact page will only happen, it'll only appear and only load when I click the edit button. And the edit button will allow me to go in, modify my contact database, right, that I have, do whatever I'm going to do, edit it, and then when I go back, I'm going to display the page again. That's what's going to happen. I'm going to display content, right? And when I display the content, it's going to be the new content that I made or that I updated. And guys and girls, this is the exact same way you'd use it. You kind of do things in a real database. And you're going to see this kind of CRUD functionality, somewhat similar, that I'm talking about in your COMP125 course, which is your next course you're going to take with ASP.NET, because you're probably going to do full CRUD there, right? And you're going to have to create the pages for this to happen. You have to create some kind of form to do all your create, read, update, and delete, right? You have to do that kind of stuff. So questions around this, what I've done so far today, right? I know it's a lot, but you have all the data that you need, right, in order for you to start thinking about how to do stuff differently. I want to do one more thing before we go, and which is address your assignment 3. All right. So remember what your assignment 3 is doing is, and I had some questions yesterday. Riaz came and asked me some questions with Newsrat yesterday. We had a little bit of a session. But remember what I'm doing here is my contacts, my data.json file in this particular case, I made it complex, right? I have like 4 properties. Each property is different. Inside here, there's a context. I've also made a contacts object. Like, I mean, I went crazy with this example, right? Here's my contact, class, right, as an example. We've almost used everything that we've talked about so far to date, if you think about it. We've used the location object, we've used the window, the BOM, the DOM, we've manipulated the DOM and the BOM, we've used arrays, array data, all kinds of stuff that we've done. We've injected AJAX, we've used Bootstrap from a front-end perspective, kind of hitting all kinds of areas that we've covered up to date, right? But guys, you don't have to do all this. The paragraph.json file, all it has to have is a list of paragraphs. And remember that JSON, if I was going to set up my paragraphs file, let's set up a new file as an example. I'm going to make a paragraphs .json file. The paragraphs.json file could literally be a bunch of paragraphs that looks like this. So I could say something like paragraph 1. This could be as simple or as complex as you want to make it, right? Paragraph 1. In my paragraph 1, I could say, this is my first paragraph, right? Oh, I don't need this thing. And then paragraph 2. Let's do paragraph 3 and 4 too. Okay, so there's paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4. And I can say this is my second, and this is my third, and this is my fourth. This is my last. We'll say my last paragraph. There we go. Okay, good. So I got my paragraph data. Yay! And it's called paragraphs.json. Okay, it's not really paragraphs. It's just some text, and I want to inject it. How do I load this thing? My JSON loader would be different. Let's make a paragraph loader really quickly. So in my apps, app.js, which is in here. Let's make a new thing called paragraph loader. It's going to look eerily similar to my load JSON function, right? So if I look at my load JSON function, if I go back to load JSON, it's going to look very similar to this. So let's just copy it, all right? Now, remember, I told you, you have to make a loader specific to what you're loading, right? So if I go here, here's my load JSON. I'm not going to call it load JSON. We'll call it load paragraphs. Right, there's my load paragraphs. And instead of loading data.json, it's going to be paragraphs.json, okay? And then it's not going to go into address book. It's going to go into something called paragraphs. So I'm going to go up here to the top, and I'll say let paragraphs. Okay? And then what's going to happen is down inside my load paragraphs, I'm going to say that paragraphs is equal to json.parse context, same as before, right? I don't need this because I'm not displaying data, right? I'm just loading the paragraph information. That's what load paragraphs does. Load paragraphs, loads paragraphs, all right? And the data is going to be finished load, so we'll say paragraph data, just to make it different. So paragraph data, finished loading, we know that. So the paragraph gets loaded into my paragraphs object, right? And then let's simply show what that is. So console log paragraphs. Now this is important to understand what it does because this is different than the array. The other object that we created, JSON object or JSON file, had, oops, not this one. My data.json was actually looks like this. It looks like an array, a named array, right? A named array of objects. But my paragraphs JSON data is like literally just a bunch of variables. That's all it is, right? And it's kind of actually they're just properties. They're properties of my paragraphs.json file. That's all they are. Think about it that way. Just properties like this. They can just sit like this. Okay, so let's view it. So the way to do it is if I go to my app.js, I want to do my load paragraphs, I don't know, somewhere in main for now. Okay, we can move it later so it works with our files, right? But somewhere down in main, which is like right here, I can go in here and say, oh, paragraphs. Literally, I haven't changed anything. I still have my XHR object. I'm still updating. I'm doing all the regular stuff I'm doing. And it's going to happen every time I load my page. Every page. For every page, I'm going to load paragraphs. Okay? Now, you wouldn't do this, right? So if I go here to my contact, doesn't matter where I go, I can still see in my console that my data finished loading, and I have my object, and I can see my paragraphs. Paragraph 1, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, right? So there's my paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I really think about that in my load paragraphs, right? So if I go back up to my load paragraphs file, or my function, I mean, which is way up here, I could do a for each loop right here, right? I could do some kind of for each loop that goes through each of the paragraphs and outputs them. So I say put something like for each, right? Now, here's something. Would it be a for each or a for in? What am I getting? I'm getting an object. My object has a bunch of properties, right? So going back to that, let me undo that change for a second. Going back to that, if you look at the paragraph data that I'm getting, right? It's an object that has a bunch of properties, and you see the prototype is object. This is important. That means I can use a for in with the key as the paragraph. That's what I can do. So I can do a for in loop. That's why remember I talked about for each, for in, for of. There's different loops to do different things. The for in is what you need in this case. Again, instead of the key, it's not key, it's the actual property. Okay, so we'll call it property. And the object is going to be paragraphs. And let's just make that paragraphs object throughout the entire thing there. There's the paragraphs object. So I'm looping for each property in paragraphs, in my paragraphs object. I want to console log that property. So I want to say console log in this particular case, right? I want to, so this is how I would start thinking about, kind of getting the data. I can't give you the whole solution, guys, because you got to think a little bit too, right? But I'm getting my paragraph data this way. I'm looping through each of the properties in the paragraph data, and I'm getting it, right? Okay, cool. So, and we're printing it out. Okay, there it is. My first, second. This actual text now that I'm getting, right? So I'm almost there. Now, if you want to use specific text, or you want to look at specific text, instead of looping through each one, I could do that too. I could say something like, if I know what my paragraph is called, and you're setting up your paragraph, so you do it, you could say paragraphs. I want to use that one. Let's print that one up. I can say something like console.log paragraphs, paragraph 1. And you could say something like, let's make it so it's a, make it so that it is a template string. And we'll put in paragraph 1. Right? And we'll do the $sign paragraphs, paragraph 1. So you can see that it's injecting the paragraph inside of there. Right? There we go. And then when you go back, you can see that paragraph 1 is this my first paragraph, because I'm calling paragraph 1, right? Paragraph 1 being paragraphs.paragraph 1. If I said paragraph 3, right? Let's just change this up. Then paragraph 3, this is my third paragraph. So you can access the paragraph based on the property name, which is what you need to do, right? So whatever it's called, don't make it funky or whatever. You can make each of your paragraphs have or headers or whatever you want. Do whatever, however you want to make this. So this is one thing you can make your JSON file look like. Very simple, flat file that has all your paragraph data inside of your JSON data. Okay? Very simple. Like literally, you're not doing anything. You're just like looking at your paragraph data. It's inside of your JSON file, and you're loading it in. That's all you're doing. Okay? That's one way to do it. And the other way to do it before I leave for today, let's make another one. We'll call it paragraphs 2. We'll say this is another way of doing it. Okay, so we'll say, let's make a new file. We'll call it paragraphs 2.json. Another version of paragraphs. Bring up here. So paragraphs and paragraphs 2. Paragraphs 2 another way of doing it would be like this. If I had a header for my paragraph, like somewhat what you did, I could create objects. Now, here's something. Can I make an array that's unnamed? Can I do that in JSON? Is that allowed? Can I do this? Can I do this? And then inside my array, could I put some data? Could I put some elements? Empty thing. And the answer is no, you can't do it. See how the array has to have a name next to it? The array is the data. You can't put data by itself, right? Just like I couldn't do, but can I do this? Can I do an empty object, right? No, right? You can't do an empty object here. It's got the object has to be named, right? So any element you put inside of JSON has to be a named element, right? Whether it's an object or whether it's an array. Let's make it an object. So let's call this object, instead of paragraph data, as an example, let's call it skills, right? So I'll say skills. We'll say the first skill, or whatever the skill you want to have, skill 1. You want to loop through all the skills, and my skill is actually an array, is actually an object now. And my object, just to give you what it looks like, my skill has 2 properties. One property is the skill name, so skill name, right? Or maybe we'll just call it name. Name, that's much easier. And the name of the property is, I don't know, CSS or JavaScript. How about JavaScript? JavaScript is my skill, right? I know how to do that. And then my details, as an example for that skill, is I know JavaScript. I know JS. There's the details, all right? So I have that, a couple skills, and let's add another one. Let's add another skill. Again, we didn't really cover JSON data too much, and that's why I kind of feel bad. So here's skill number 2, and instead of JavaScript, we'll call it TypeScript. And I know TS too. I know TypeScript as well. I know a couple skills, and I want to load up this information. So we'll say load skills, right? So again, different ways of loading different things, right? So I'm going to go to my app, and here's my, instead of let paragraphs, we'll say let skills in this particular case. And you know what? Just to be fair, let's close this paragraphs.json off and rename it to skills, just because, to make it contextual. Skills. There we go. Skills.json, paragraphs.json. Cool. So I got my skills, and I got my skills up here, and I want to load skills just like I've loaded JSON. Here's my load paragraphs. It's going to be eerily similar to my loading of my paragraphs. In fact, I'll take my load paragraphs, copy it, and paste it. Boop. There we go. And instead of load paragraphs, we're going to say load skills. I'm going to put this all up on GitHub in a second, so you'll see this will help you. But why am I giving you different options? Because maybe you want to do it slightly different, right? You want to do it so that it's an object as opposed to a flat file. I've given you array. I've given you a flat property, and now I'm giving you an object. And you can see the difference, right? So here is, we'll call it skills, right? And the property that we're going to pass through skills, right? It's exactly the same, right? So, but when we do this, it's an object of skills, and we can't do skills dot skill one, because if we did skill dot skill one as an example, this is skill one, that would give us an object, right? Skill dot skill one, and let's just make sure it's skills.json. Sorry, I know I'm running out of time. But if you look down here, I'm going to not just load paragraphs, but load skills. And now, cannot read property skill one of undefined. What did I do? What did I do? You get the picture though, right? There's skills, load skills. Oh, there it is, skills. That'll be okay. And then skills.skill1, because skill one is a property, and that still didn't work. Let's just do this for a second. Let's just do, skills. I'll be okay. Because skills, property of skills, this will be skills property. I'll be okay. As property of property. Let's mess it up. What did I do? I might as well just do another for each, a for in, because that's what's messing me up. But if I did this, that should still work. Let's see if that works. Skills, skill. Did I not load the skill in there? Oh, aha. Right, and now I can do that for in, and again, it's going to be the property of the skills array, my skills array. So there's my skills, and I want to just do console log each of the properties. That's each of them. For each property, I'm kind of saying each of the properties. These are them, right? So skill, JavaScript, and TypeScript. Now notice that there are objects instead of what they were before. And it says skill one is undefined because skill one, skill two, look. Skill one is name and details. And for each skill, inside that thing, I'm going through printing out each of the names, name and name, TypeScript and JavaScript. That's what this does. That's what this part does. And skills itself picks up different kinds of skills, right? So if I look at, and I'm sorry, I'm using skills and skill, but notice it says skill one with a capital S. I made a mistake. It's not skill one. Yeah, let's go skill one, lowercase s. All right, and now if I was to go back to my JSON object, no, my app.js, this should work. And yeah, we have an object. But you notice it's an object, and we don't want that. We want skill one dot, let's say I want to put the name of the skill. So I can do the skill one name. And if I want to go into skill one, because I have to go down deeper into it, because it's not just looking at the skill as a flat file anymore. Detail, I can say skill one detail. And then if I did this, this should give you everything you need. And Detailed? Did I do details or detailed? Skills, details. You got to know the thing, right? And what it is. Here's details. And then I can see now that is, that you get everything drilled down. So that's what I wanted to show you. I want to show you that you can make your own custom loader for whatever files you want to load, right? The first one I made was with a some kind of array. Now the second object, the paragraphs, was just a flat JSON file of properties, and this one is a JSON file of objects. Okay? Questions around this stuff? I'm gonna put this up on GitHub. Paragraphs, JSON options, JSON load options. Okay, one more thing to note before I go. I'm not asking you to do single page application for your assignment 3. Okay, please don't go crazy and make that if you don't know what to do. Right? Take your assignment number 2 and modify it so it just loads the JSON data. I'm not even asking you to do navigation right now. Your assignment number 3 doesn't require that. That was your lab last week, which only 8 people did. Right? Okay, it's this one is just for JSON data, just taking the paragraph data, using AJAX to load it up and spit it into your file. That's all you need to do, okay? That's all I require for next week. And there's one other part where it says add your web config file, modify your web config file in your assignment number 3. That's only if you're using Azure. If you're using Azure, you need to modify your web config file or JSON data will be ignored, right? Microsoft Azure. If you're putting it up on that server. If you're not putting it up on server and if you're just using GitHub pages, you can ignore that and you're going to get a free mark for that. Okay? And that's it, guys. See you next week. Good luck with your assignment.